When one person really wants closeness to feel safe, and then the other person needs space or distance to feel safe and regulated emotionally, conflict is going to be inevitable unless you know how to create safety on both sides. So today I want to talk about what that invisible dance is, that anxious avoidant cycle, and I'm going to share what's really happening, the impact that it has on the dynamic, and then 4 steps that you can take to break out of the cycle before the love is drained from your relationship. This is the most common and most self-reinforcing attachment pairing. The good news is, though, I don't really think that attachment styles are your destiny. I think that they can be interrupted. I think that they can be rewired and reconditioned. I look at attachment styles as a default coping mechanism, just like any survival skill that you learn to adapt to your environment growing up. That's what kept you safe. That's what worked for you. And so that is now your default, depending on your environment. And the tendency is for the anxiously attached folks to be drawn to the more avoidant folks and vice versa. So what's really happening is that if we look at it in the most simple way, anxious attachment is that if there's distance, I feel unsafe. If I'm not in the know on what's going on with my partner, if I'm not in the know on what they're thinking or feeling, if I feel any kind of gap in that awareness or connection, there's a lack of safety. So closeness equals safety. For the avoidantly attached person, if there's too much closeness, they feel unsafe. So distance or space or breathing room, that's what feels safe to avoidantly attached individuals. What I want to highlight is that it doesn't have anything to do with who cares more. It often looks like the anxiously attached person cares more about the connection. That's not true. A lot of avoidants care deeply about the connection. That's why they feel so dysregulated when they feel out of their depth or they're not sure what to do or they feel activated, and they are withdrawing because they don't want to make things worse. They don't want to hurt the connection. They don't want to get it wrong. They don't want to hurt their spouse. They don't have the skills or tools. Or they just honestly don't understand themselves enough and they need to get some clarity first before they communicate. So just because if, let's say you're listening to this and you have an avoidantly attached spouse, just know that it's not that they don't care unless there's other indicators. But from attachment style alone, that is not going to be the best indicator on how invested they are in the relationship and how much they care about how close and satisfying and mutually fulfilling the relationship is. So the dynamic is we have a pursuing and withdrawing spiral. So the anxiously attached partner, once they sense that there's a little bit of distance, they don't know what's going on, their spouse is seeming sort of out of sorts, maybe they're tired, they're just not talking as much, that's going to create anxiety. And then as a way of trying to bring that connection back, they engage in protest behaviors. So protest behaviors would be like, maybe blaming or arguing or picking a fight or just something to get their attention. A fraught connection is better than no connection. So a lot of times you'll pick a fight or start something just as a way of staying engaged because not staying engaged feels really unbearable. So this can be pressing, lots of questions, lots of complaining, pointing the finger, saying you're not doing this, you're not doing that, this is missing. That's sort of one side of the equation. On the other side, the avoidant partner feels pressured. They shut down, they deflect, or they physically leave. They might give monosyllabic answers. They might just try to kick the can down the road and say, I don't want to talk about that right now, with no promise to return. They'll not give you a real answer, or you can feel if they're like just kind of saying what you want to hear, but you can tell there's not congruence. So that'll come up a lot and that will activate the anxiety even more. They're saying the right things, but I don't feel like they're really meaning it. And maybe they're just saying that to pacify me or shut me up. And I can't really trust that it's really coming from that wholehearted, authentic place. And then they want reassurance even more. So the protesting behavior confirms the avoidance fear of being overwhelmed. And then the withdrawal confirms the anxious spouse's fear of abandonment. And so every single turn reinforces the next. It's like the more anxious you are, the more that you engage anxious behaviors, the more avoidant your partner becomes, the more avoidant you become, the more anxious your spouse becomes, and so on and so on. And the avoidant spouse will become very resentful if they feel like they are forced to connect before they feel ready, just, to appease them or to not live with the feeling of tension, right? So then they will try to show up in a way that they're not really equipped to, or they don't really feel congruent with that, but they try and then they're in resentment. And then that only makes it worse because you can feel that, right? And then the anxious spouse will feel very alone and rejected, which in the long term will build walls emotionally. So somebody that has been wanting more of an emotional connection, who tends to be more on the anxious side of this cycle, this is a long, slow process. But after a long time, if they really feel like they cannot be met and they feel so alone, it turns into despair over time, right? And sort of a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness. So then they start building walls around their heart. They pull away and they detach. And then they reach the point of no return. And trust me, I talk to so many people every week where I'm talking to a leaning in spouse whose spouse is past the point of no return, or potentially, or maybe past the point of no return. And they are desperately realizing, I wasn't really hearing their pleas for deeper connection. And now I'm ready to learn how to do that. But now they're past the point of no return. So that one will sneak up on you. That one is something to be aware of if you're on the more avoidant side and your spouse is telling you they need more connection. Don't ignore that if you really want to stay married. So the emotional impact this has, I already talked about the resentment and the feelings of abandonment, but also just in the dynamic, there's this feeling of walking on eggshells. There's a feeling of uneasiness. Even when the anxious person gets what they want, they never really feel like they can trust it because they think, well, maybe that won't be the case next week, right? It never feels truly satisfying. It's the same fight, different day, or it's that feeling of like, we just can't meet in the middle. One person has to give up how they are to meet the other, and there's no middle ground. And that's a common complaint that I hear. Now, to create safety on both sides, I think a lot of people feel like they have to change their nature in order to disrupt this cycle and meet in the middle. But you can actually create shared safety where it's not that you're giving up your default mode entirely, but you're expanding your repertoire and you're expanding the number of tools that you have so that you have a little more flexibility, right? It's not that you can't still be who you are. You just become a better version, a more skilled version of who you are. So the first thing is you want to remember that this is going to be about downshifting each person's nervous system. So step one is to have self-regulation before the conversation. You have to be regulated. You have to be calm. So if you're the anxious spouse and you just feel like you're coming in hot, it's not the time to have the conversation. You're not even ready to have step one. So you have to make sure that you're calm and intentional and regulated. Your heart rate's not high. You certainly don't want to do this shortly after an argument or a point of disconnection. So you regulate yourself. That's going to pause the chase, the pursuing and withdrawing cycle. And then you're going to breathe and calm yourself down through tapping. You can do sound meditations. You can just do regular meditations, guided meditations, yoga, whatever works for you that you know will soothe your nervous system. That is the first step. The second step is you want to reassure the other person while you're holding space. And both of you can do this in different ways. So for the anxious partner, you're going to lead with vulnerability instead of protest. And that's hard because when you feel vulnerable, you want to come in angry because you feel more protected if you come in hot, if you come in angry, if you come in with a little bit of charge behind it and finger pointing. It feels more powerful and less vulnerable or scared or alone or powerless than if you were just to come in and say, I'm really scared, right? I feel like we're disconnected and I'd really like to feel closer to you. But that's what has to happen. You have to pull back the curtain. Don't come in with finger pointing. Come in and say, I'm feeling this way, and lead with vulnerability. Now for the avoidant partner, you're going to want to offer a place and time, or you're going to want to have a promise to return. So you get to say, if you're avoidant, you certainly have the right to say, I can't talk about that right now. I know myself, and I know that that's going to drain me out. I have something important coming up, and I know that I don't have the resources to do this right now. And if it goes badly, it's really going to mess up this meeting I need to have. Whatever it is, you get to say, this is not the right time. But what you can't do is just keep saying that without a promise to return and follow through. You don't want to say, let's talk about it tonight and then never bring it up again, right? And wait for them. Like, well, I said I would talk about it tonight. If you're the one saying, I'm not ready for this conversation, then you're the one that has to circle back at the time that you offered. And if you're still not ready at the time you offered, that's okay, but you still have to circle back and say, you know what? I said we would talk at this time. I'm still not ready. And let's come up with another time. So that way they know you haven't forgotten. It's still on your mind. You are taking accountability. You haven't forgotten and you're in tune to them. It makes them feel, if you're the avoidant spouse, it makes the anxious spouse feel like you are caring about how they feel because you're aware that they're waiting and you're not just blowing it off. I think a lot of times in that cycle, the avoidant spouse might think that, well, as long as my anxious partner isn't complaining, we're good. Don't rock the boat. But that's not the case. Because even if they're temporarily getting over it on their own silently, like it will build and it will blow up at some point later. So you have to make sure that you take the proactive stance and take the full accountability and ownership over your promise to return and then actually following through on that because it's relational. Because if you don't, you're basically communicating, I don't care that this is distressing to you. As long as you're not bothering me, I'm fine with you feeling anxious, losing sleep, ruminating. And you might say, well, that's a you problem, but that's not very relational. Even if it is true, right? Even if they have their own attachment trauma that isn't on you, and you know that that's their work to do, if you chose to be in a relationship with that person, you ought to care, right? To be sensitive to their areas of triggering, to be sensitive and try to support them as much as you can, even though what's on their side of the street is on their side of the street. You can't fix that. But you certainly can be relational in the sense that you show that you care and that you are aware of the distress and that, hey, your problem is my problem. Because like, what is a relationship? If your partner's having a problem and you don't care about that, then there is no we, right? There is no us in the relationship. You might as well just have a roommate. That's how I look at it. The third step is you want to shift from blame to shared problem solving. This is about moving out of the me versus you and trying to get something from them the way that you want it, and panning out to a 30,000 foot view and saying, how can we come together with this, right? You need this. I need this. We're in gridlock over this. We're not judging each other. Neither is wrong. How do we come together? How do we get on the same side of the table? How do we think outside the box and be creative as two members of the same team, just like you would at your job if you've ever sat in a meeting and you're on a team, a multidisciplinary team, a team of different opinions, and you have a shared agenda. How are we going to move this forward when we have different opinions? You don't have to make each other wrong. You just have to take what's good from each person's viewpoint and bring it together and weave it into its own tapestry, right? And so it becomes greater than me versus you. It's not two parts. It's greater than two parts. That's where the magic happens. And you can say this out loud. You can say, like, it looks like we're getting stuck in me versus you again. It looks like we're in gridlock and we're not getting anywhere. Why don't we pause? Or if you feel like you don't need to pause, you can just ask the question, how can we solve this together? Because it's an invitation and it's not adversarial, and it communicates that, I'm not judging you and I'm not defending myself from you either. There's nothing to protect ourselves from because we feel safe with each other. We care about each other. We embrace that these are just differences that we have, and we don't have to make the other person like us in order to feel safe. We can honor these differences as long as both parties respect them enough, the other person, to adjust themselves according to what the other needs. Of course, not to the extent that you're sacrificing your values or that you're out of integrity or that you're abandoning yourself to give them what they want. No, it has to be aligned with who you are and how you want to show up in the world. And, it has to be in integrity with your life dreams. But what is the problem, right? There is no problem with giving something that will help them out a little bit as long as it doesn't compromise yourself, right? And most of the time, 95% of the time, these gridlock patterns that I see are not about mutually incompatible life dreams or mutually incompatible values. They share the basic essence of their life dreams. They have very similar values. They just are stuck in feeling like the other person is wrong for being how they are, or they're giving too much meaning to their feelings that they have about their spouse's otherness. And they're giving it the meaning that it's something about them, or they're giving it the meaning that their brain was conditioned to give it as a way of making sense of whatever they were coping with or adapting to in their environment growing up. So that's why it's a coping skill. So if you can just keep that in mind and have compassion for each other, that's going to go a long way. Once you have gotten to the same side and you're like, all right, we're going to do this together, then you can start to work together to build micro moments of secure attachment. Don't try to build secure attachment over the hot button issues. Try to build secure attachment over smaller things, because it's easier to build that and to flex that muscle and to put money in the joint emotional bank account that you can then withdraw from later. So you could have daily check-ins, just 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening. How are you? What was the hardest thing? Anything I can do to make your day easier? For the anxious spouse, if you're the avoidant, doing those check-ins and getting curious means a lot, because you're proactively reaching out to show curiosity and attunement to their inner world. And that on a primal level creates safety. So daily check-ins are huge. That's just one example. Also, I think appreciation rituals, 1 gratitude per day, especially for the anxious attached person who has been critical of the more avoidant spouse. The avoidant spouse probably tends to feel like it's never enough. It's not enough. So if you're anxiously attached, make sure that you appreciate your avoidant spouse for the things that they do. Don't focus always on how they're not showing up or the areas where they're struggling, but focus on all the ways that they are showing up for you, that they are showing that they love you, that they are invested in your relationship and, your health and happiness. Look for the evidence, because when you are stuck in these cycles, your perceptual filter is distorted. And trust me, it is. Like, don't think that it's not. You are human. We are all human. There's so many points of data that we take in throughout the day that we can only selectively focus on and remember some of them. Just a fraction of everything that comes into our subconscious mind or passes, our sight line or goes into our awareness consciously or subconsciously. Then we choose what we focus our attention on. And then what we focus our attention on is what we actually grow. So when you start focusing on all of the evidence that your avoidant spouse cares about you, you're going to be able to have a lot of data that you can look at that will prompt you or will be like an external cue for you the next time you're triggered or you feel abandoned or you're left to self-soothe. You can look at it in black and white because you're not going to be able to do it from the inside out once you're dysregulated. You need those external prompts, somebody from the outside telling you something that you need to hear. And having that even just in a journal or written down somewhere can serve as that. Even though you wrote it at a time that you were not distorted in your thinking, when you had more of a balanced view of things. So the next time you get triggered, you can go back to that. And in my program, I call it the brag book. You can call it the book of positive aspects. Call it whatever you want. Some people don't like the word brag because it goes against their values. Whatever makes sense to you. Scientifically, it's a fact that if you bring your attention to positive things, the things that you're grateful for, evidence of the thing you desire that's already available to you, it will keep your hope alive. It will help you feel more confident. It will help you feel more trusting, and it will help you feel less anxious. Right? And the less anxious you are, the more the avoidant wants to come forward. So you're actually creating safety between you. The anxious spouse actually can do a lot. I think in the anxious avoidant dynamic, a lot of times the focus is on how can we get our avoidant spouse to become less avoidant. But I like to flip it around and say, how can the anxious spouse become less anxious? Because the less anxious you are, the safer it is for the avoidant spouse. And now they're less avoidant. Like they're not even avoidant anymore because you became less anxious. But you can work it from both ends, right? Both parties can disrupt it from their side. If you become less avoidant, your partner will become less anxious. If you become less anxious, your avoidant partner will become less avoidant. It is a polarity, and it's like a seesaw. And so when you unhook from one side of the polarity, it throws it off balance. And so the way that you find that balance again is the other person has to move on that continuum in order for there to be balance. It's sort of like, it's a law. I don't know what it's called, but it's like a law of equilibrium, right? If you have equilibrium and one person changes their side of how that equilibrium is maintained, it can't stay the way it is. It has to all get stirred up and settle back down into something else. And so that's a good thing. That's your opportunity. I think finding the sweet spot, this is the final stage, is like really understanding what the middle ground looks like and being willing on your side to start going towards the middle ground even before your partner starts moving into the middle ground. So what does that look like? The middle ground, that middle in the seesaw, is going to be flexible closeness, right? So time together and time apart are both valued. You do not, as the avoidant, have to learn to change your threshold of closeness to match your anxiously attached spouse, and vice versa. You start to value what the other values. So if you're the avoidant, look for how valuable it is to you to feel close. And trust me, it is, even if you're not in touch with it. Because I talk to avoidants all the time whose spouses have left, and they weren't in touch with how important it was to them because their spouse was holding that for both of them. And once that anxious spouse left, now they are left holding it. Like, oh my gosh, now I'm in touch with all of these things that I didn't have to feel because I could point to my spouse and say, you're too clingy, you're too needy, you want too much, because I disowned that in me. And so now I'm pointing at it in you and I don't like it in me, so I'm going to reject it in you. But once they're gone and you can't do that anymore, now you can only feel it inside yourself. So the avoidant person has to really understand the value that a greater degree of closeness will bring you. But it doesn't have to feel threatening. It can feel good when you realize that you don't have to jump through hoops or do a big song and dance. I did a whole video on this about what you can do if you're the shutdown spouse, specific things. So I'm not going to get into that now. But just theoretically, that's what I want to convey, is that if you're the avoidant spouse, you probably care more about closeness than you are letting yourself feel. And so just remember that you have to value that, join your partner in valuing that, and remember that you don't have to do it in such a threatening way if you do it in small ways that I suggested already. Also, you want to have mutual repair. You don't want to let resentments build up if you're in this dynamic. Be able to quickly, reliably reconnect after conflict. How this goes is that you're able to share how you feel, the meaning you gave it, and what you need to feel better. Never talking about the other person, never finger pointing, never blaming, never criticizing, just sharing, this is what's coming up for me, this is the meaning it has, this is what I really would like, this is what would help me feel better. And then they can choose to give it or not, but at least you know you didn't do anything to block that. right? Because it's not charged. It's factually accurate. There's nothing to argue with. It doesn't create defensiveness, and it allows both of you to hear each other and get on the same team quicker. And then earned security is another way of describing this balance that you can find. And that's over time, the anxious partner's alarm quiets and the avoidant partner's guard softens. And this will happen. Like, you will actually see this happen. I just so often hear people talking about these attachment styles like they are fixed, they are immutable, they are rigid. And so sometimes people leave their marriage or their relationship because of attachment styles. And it doesn't have to be like that. If you really love each other and you're really committed to the relationship, this is just a skills issue. It's a self-awareness issue. And it's the willingness to know yourself and change whatever core beliefs are under the surface of whatever your default style is. If your default style is maladaptive, if your default style is so strong that it is hurting your relationship, then you also have to look at what are the core beliefs I need to change. How can I internalize a sense of safety even when my spouse is more distant because they're going through something right now? How do I unhook my sense of safety from my spouse? Because that is a childlike state. Even though we as adults, we all are wired for attachment. We all need attachment. But if you're an anxiously attached spouse, it's probably at the level of your amygdala is firing alarms as if your survival is at stake. And that sense of urgency will override what you know is the right thing to do in terms of communicating. It will allow you to override your spouse's boundaries, right? So you have to look at the emotional urgency behind both stances, whatever your default is. Make sure that you look at what do I have to condition in terms of my beliefs about myself, my safety, my capacity, my competency. Those are all core beliefs. Safety, worthiness, and competency are the three main categories that you really want to look at. And then just encourage each other. We acknowledge that the style makes it hard. This is our learning opportunity as a couple. And we can do this together because we both commit to doing it. We're each going to look at our own part in it. And we're going to also do what we can to support the other person. It's not always going to be 50-50. So don't worry about that. Think about 100-100. You do 100%. Do not worry about fairness. If you worry about fairness, it will hold you back from doing the very things that will have all the power in the world to create what you actually desire. So this sort of false sense of injustice, that's all. I think it's a limiting belief. You have absolutely nothing to lose by showing up in a way that actually upholds what you desire. That just makes you a stand-up person. So I hope you feel empowered by that. I think couples that practice these habits often, they will notice the changes within weeks, right? So you're going to have setbacks. Sometimes it's 5 steps forward, 2 steps back. The trick is when you have those 2 steps back that you don't think, oh, we've made no progress. You will start to feel like when you're in it, you lose that 30,000 foot view. You lose perspective, like the stock market, like it feels like you're crashing. But when you look at the overall trajectory, we're moving in the right direction. So keep that in mind. Give yourself some grace and remember that your attachment style, it's not a life sentence. Your attachment style is simply a starting point. It's simply a paradigm. It's a construct that helps us develop self-awareness, just like love languages. There's a lot of different frameworks that we can use and they're all useful, but they're not some kind of hard-coded thing in you that could never change. So if there's anything that I want you to walk away with is that just by understanding it, you already have power to change it. And then the second half is just showing up and building a relationship that feels secure and alive and deeply connected and also self-honoring. It's definitely possible. So I hope that helps. One last thing, if you want help with this, and you're not already in my program and you want support for this or want to at least explore it, you can book a free call. That's monikahoyt.com/talk. And you can talk to somebody on my team to just find out a little bit more. And we can learn a little bit more about your dynamics, do a little bit of a deeper dive around the barriers and see if we can give you some targeted advice. It's a no obligation call. That's it for today. If you like my content, please take a second and either like this video or subscribe to my channel or both. That will help us reach the people that really need to hear this stuff.